Welcome to Deposit Your Doubt. This isn't a space of judgment, but a sanctuary for spiritual exploration. Here, your questions aren't threats to faith, they're invitations to deeper understanding. I'm Krystal, and I've learned that our most profound moments of spiritual growth often bloom in the uncertain terrain between what we know and what we're still discovering. Every doubt you carry is welcome here. Every wrestling match with belief is sacred. This podcast is your soft landing, your grace-filled conversation, your reminder that questioning doesn't mean breaking, it means becoming. We are going to talk today about our past. And for some of us, this may be an easy conversation, and for some of us, this will be very difficult. The decisions that we make in our past can often be drivers for how we think that God views us. Sometimes we feel incomplete from the thoughts of our past or the lived consequences, and even just the idea that somewhere, somehow, we may not have honored the Lord in our decisions. I have found when I encounter people who feel this way, or even the times in my own life that fit this category, there's a reckoning with the juxtaposition of lament and faith in God. When I was 24, I met my husband. His name is Jared. Up until this point, while there had been hard things that happened in my life, I had not fully wrestled with the feeling like God abandoned me. I had lost all of my grandparents by this time. I had moved more than 24 times in my whole life, each of those times having to meet new people and settle into new things over and over again. For some people, that would be incredibly hard, but for me, it was very normal. My family had been mistreated at several churches that my dad served as a pastor at, and hurt by many people within the church walls. Even with all of that, I still never felt like the Lord left me or my family. I can't speak for my parents because I'm sure they felt differently, but I myself, I was pretty good. When I met my husband, he wasn't so good. My cheery disposition as a young 24-year-old girl in grad school was not quite ready for the pain that he was carrying. And yet, when I look back, I know that God placed me in his path for a reason. As I was getting to know my husband in the very early stages of us talking, and I should interject here that we were in a long-distance relationship the entirety of our dating and engaged life. We lived 8 hours apart when we met, so this getting to know you phase mostly happened on the phone. In the first few days of talking to him, I felt like there was a lot about him that was so good. It was unreal. I just didn't believe that this was a real person. I was waiting for the other shoe to drop, to see what really wasn't all that great. Then one day, I'm talking to him as I'm driving home from work, and I can picture the exact exit ramp that I was on in Virginia, which is where I lived at the time, when the words came out of his mouth, "I'm divorced." My whole being sank into my seat. There it is. The thing I was waiting for, the not-so-perfect mark on who he is. And almost as immediately as he said it, the Lord jarred my spirit and said, "Listen and lean in, Krystal." This would be new territory for me. As you've heard a few times now, I grew up in a very conservative Christian home with a dad who was a pastor. I had been taught my whole life how bad and wrong divorce was. I had been taught it was never an option. The Lord could and would always restore. And I had been taught that there were only a couple reasons anyone could ever get divorced. So once my future husband said that he had been divorced, I looked for the magic words to qualify why he was divorced, so that my upbringing could sort of reason through this. Did she cheat? Not sure, but that's not the reason. Did she abandon you? No. Well, then why? She really never loved me, and she was brave enough to tell me. My head was spinning. I was already quite hooked to this person, but how would I be able to reconcile this? And how in the world would I tell my parents about this? Their whole town would talk about this, and it would be horrendous. I mentioned before how we had been through a lot of church hurt, and how I handled this will be strewn throughout many of these episodes, mainly because I'm still always working it out. But I have settled in a place where I think we, the people of God, do a really poor job in representing Him, especially within the church walls. That day in June on the road in Virginia, I could already hear the words in my head that my conservative bubble back home would be murmuring. And since I didn't live there, my parents would be the ones answering for the decisions I made. I know this seems quite outlandish, and it is, but it was true. To prove the point, over the next year, when my husband, future husband, and I decided to be together, these are two things that actually happened. The first was my dad made the decision to perform the marriage ceremony of a girl I grew up with to her second husband, which everyone knew was someone who was really good for her and for her life circumstances. She had married the wrong person the first time, and this was her redemption. My dad had always refused to officiate people's second weddings, holding fast to his belief that divorce is not an option. Well, he decided to officiate her wedding, and I had someone say to my face that year, "We all believe he did this to justify marrying you to your boyfriend one day." I was appalled. I couldn't believe they said this to me. How are the two the same? How did her life have anything to do with mine? And why qualify my dad's actions? No one knows what he and the Lord had worked out. No one knows what the Lord had told him. It was bizarre to me. Then another time, someone who worked for my mom, who also went to school with me when I was younger, made a statement to a few friends that she had taken a deep dive into the internet and found where Jared had been married before. She thought it was shameful and told a few people as such. Small town gossip. It never really benefited anyone. What did she gain from this knowledge? Feeling better than me? What an interesting amount of time she spent to gain that. So there you go. That was what I knew would happen in a tiny conservative town, and I really didn't want anything to do with it. As Jared and I talked about his past and what happened, the Lord began showing me so many things about His will and trajectory for my life and for Jared's. I remember Jared and I messaging each other on, don't gasp too hard when I say this one, MySpace. And one day, Jared was working through his emotions, and he said to me that he was captivated by David in the Psalms, when he laments and he agonizes about his life, but then in the next breath, he's praising the Lord. Jared wasn't in a place to praise yet, but it was clear he wanted to be. He wanted to be able to do that again and was mesmerized by David's ability to do so. He said to me one day, "I want to know what David knew." I remember explaining to Jared that I knew pain and joy could coexist, and I felt like David showed that to us a lot. Jared would express how the time of his marriage failing and the divorce proceedings gave him a feeling of a scarlet letter being placed on him. How could he be loved the way he longed to? Who would take a chance like that? Would there ever be deep love and deep connection? Was his idea of marriage really just an imaginary thing? He was having trouble finding any joy in the pain and the questions. And then God dropped little 24-year-old me into a situation I had no idea I was prepared for. You see, even with all the qualms I carry about parts of the conservative upbringing I had, there was one thing I saw repeatedly, and I knew wholeheartedly about the Lord. I knew that redemption was who He was. It's not just something He gives us, but it is who He is. I had no illusions that I was Jared's redemption. I didn't think that highly of myself. But it would be the first time that I truly saw how God uses our person to be a vehicle for His healing and redemption. Sometimes you're the person carrying the parts of Jesus someone needs. I would love to tell you that just my presence in Jared's life healed all of his wounds. And over time, we would see some of that happen. But we had to go through some messy work to get there. There were tears when certain movies struck a chord with him. There was a lot of hurt in conversations that he had to deal with and find a place for. And I believe he did this work more beautifully and more thoughtfully because God loved Jared tenderly through me. Jared was no less God's child because he had a failed marriage. He was completely God's son, and God was bestowing his great gifts and great love and grace on Jared as he cried out in pain. I had a first-hand experience to see what happens when we allow God's redemption to seep into the cracks we have developed. Instead of keeping the desert land of our hearts, if we allow God's love to flow through us, he will cover the cracks and scars with his balm of redemption. I saw over time how the constructs of my upbringing and the teachings of the church I grew up in were certainly a starting place, but if I didn't allow God to move through those constructs, they could bind me to places God never intended me to live. Yes, divorce is not plan A for anyone, but divorce happens. And what can God do with the broken pieces? How much more does his majesty show through when you allow him to rebuild to his specifications? I once read a quote by Pastor John Gray that says, "No matter what evil you have experienced in the past, that experience should not hold you hostage for the rest of your life." Our marriage is not perfect. No one's is. But our marriage is a sweet, sweet picture of what God can do with broken things. Our marriage is a great reminder to us and those who know us that God is in the business of redemption. And not only is he in the business of redemption for the sake of one or two, he redeems for the generations to grow and proclaim who he is. We now have 5 beautiful boys that are a testament to what God can do with pain. I'm thankful for the broken past that led us to each other. We love each other better because of it, and we treasure what God has done more than we might have before. God does not bring you to something to stay there. He brings you to painful things to learn and glean, and then he brings you through those things into greener pastures. Jared was not meant to stay in lament. He was meant to get to the proclamation of faith that he can now speak of with the Lord. Psalm 13, 1-6 is a perfect example of this rapid shift from lament to praise. It begins with David in deep anguish asking, "How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me?" But by the end of this short psalm in verses 5-6, he dramatically shifts to praise. "But I have trusted in your steadfast love. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord because he has dealt bountifully with me." The whiplash between pain and praise is particularly striking because it happens in such a short psalm, just 6 verses. The first 4 verses are full of sorrow and questioning. Then David pivots sharply to confidence and joy in the final 2 verses. It's a beautiful example of how faith can coexist with doubt and how praise can emerge even in the midst of pain. None of us are meant to stay in lament. But if it's the lament that affords us the eyes to see and truly appreciate the redemption of the Lord, then so be it. Isaiah 43, 18-19 says, "Do not remember the past events. Pay no attention to things of old. Look, I am about to do something new. Even now it is coming. Do you not see it? Indeed, I will make a way in the wilderness, rivers in the desert." His rivers are redemption. Allow him to do this for you. Hey there, if you've been enjoying the show, I've got an exciting opportunity to share. Many of you have reached out asking how you can leverage podcasting for your own message or organization. This is exactly why we started Told You So Media. We have helped create compelling shows for some of the world's most impactful companies and individuals. If you have been dreaming about launching your own podcast, but you aren't sure where to start, or if you have a show that's ready to level up, I would love to help you bring your vision to life. At Told You So Media, we specialize in crafting documentary-style content that captures authentic stories and connects deeply with listeners. Let's explore how we can transform your expertise and insights into a powerful podcast that resonates with your audience. Book a discovery call with me, yes, face-to-face with me, through the link in the show notes. I'd love to hear about your vision and show you how we can make it happen. Every message has the power to transform lives. Let's make sure yours gets heard. I have some theological insights that I want you to take with you this week. Write them down, record this, whatever it may be. Play this over and over. These are the things that I want you to take away. There's 3 things. The first is God transforms painful experiences into opportunities for ministry and helping others. If you look at 2 Corinthians 1, 3-4, Paul writes this: "Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of mercies and God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our affliction, so that we may be able to comfort those who are in any affliction, with the comfort with which we ourselves are comforted by God." Our past struggles, when redeemed, can become a source of authentic empathy and wisdom to support others facing similar challenges. The second insight is that God can bring good out of circumstances intended for harm. This is powerfully illustrated in Genesis 50:20, where Joseph tells his brothers who had sold him into slavery, "As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive." This shows how God's redemptive power can work through even our most painful circumstances to accomplish His purposes and bless others. And then finally, I want you to see that God uses our past, including our failures, as part of our spiritual formation. Romans 8:28 assures us that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to His purpose. Rather than erasing our past, God integrates it into His larger story of transformation into our lives, using even our mistakes and our wounds as opportunities for growth in character and deepening our dependence on Him. It's okay to question. It's okay to doubt. It's okay to wonder why in the world God would allow you to go through painful circumstances. But take those times and listen and lean in as He asked me to do so many years ago. You might just find a picture that you would do anything in the world to be featured in. What a story His redemption will tell. Do not let your past define you or bind you to a place that the Lord does not intend you to stay. Use the grace and the love and the assurance that He gives us in all these scriptures I mentioned to help you see the purpose for all of the pain that you've gone through, the purpose that He has in your future. Let His redemption tell a wonderful story about your life. I'm so thankful that you joined me today. Until next time, I want you to keep being brave enough to ask the hard questions, gentle enough with yourself to acknowledge your struggles, and open enough to let God surprise you with His answers. If this episode resonated with you, remember to subscribe, share with someone you know who might need to hear it, and leave a review. It helps other seekers find our little community.
This podcast is produced by Told You So Media.
Told you so!